Good morning or good evening, everyone, and welcome to Peer-to-Peer UK Hong Kong 2022 Symposium and our third session with Dogbe and Yarli Allison in conversation. I'm Lindsay Taylor, Curator of the University of Salford Art Collection and one of the organisers of Peer-to-Peer, along with Sarah Fisher from Open Eye Gallery. Before I pass over to Louise Latter from BOM, who's going to chair this meeting, there are a few housekeeping rules to share with you. Firstly, this session is being recorded and will be added to the Peer-to-Peer website later today. Secondly, we actively encourage questions and comments from the audience. You can submit these through the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and we will be monitoring these, and we hope to have time to put them to the panel towards the end of the session. And thirdly, can I encourage you to share on social media using the hashtag #PeerToPeerUKHK22. I'm now delighted to hand over to Louise from BOM and chair of this session. Over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Lindsay. Morning, everybody, and good afternoon to those who are more further afield. So as Lindsay said, I'm Louise, and I am the head of immersive at BOM, otherwise known as Birmingham Open Media. We're an arts organisation based in the city centre of Birmingham in the UK. We're an arts organisation creating transformational digital experiences that impact different communities and members of the public. But we're not here today to talk really about BOM. I'm here. I'd also like to introduce Angel. Angel, would you like to just say a little hello and who you are?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming, and also thank you Peer-to-Peer to organize this amazing symposium as well as our virtual residency. I'm Angel, adjunct curator from Videotage. We are a moving image and media art organization in Hong Kong, founded since 1986. So long story short, I give it back to Louise. Thank you.
Thanks, Angel. So we're here today because Videotage and BOM have worked together as part of Peer-to-Peer this year to create a micro residency with the theme or the prompt of virtual bodies. This was a theme of work that interested both organisations because of past artistic programming that we'd done or future thinking about the way that we wanted to sort of look at those themes. So it's obviously a really wide spread area of work, and we were really excited when we put the call out for artists, and we were really impressed with the response that we got, and the quality of the applications was really high, and we were delighted to sort of appoint Amma and Yarli to be our resident artists. So we're going to talk a bit today about what they've been up to. The micro residency was just 5 days, so it was very intensive, and the sort of the areas that the artists were looking at were really broad and could have gone in any direction. So we're going to talk a bit about how they approached that, the work that they did. And I will be sharing my screen shortly so that you can see some of the lovely visuals of the works in progress that they created. The idea of the micro residency was very much to explore, to experiment, and to give the artists some paid time to really delve deep into these ideas that they had, not necessarily to create a finished piece at the end. Although they have created some really great work and some really great ideas that we're going to divulge into it in a moment. I just want to introduce the artists here. So we have got with us, we've got Anna Dogbe, who is our UK artist. So she was sort of recruited by BOM, and Amma is an artist who is working, I'm just going to make sure that I've got this right. So making moving image work ranging from traditional film to experimental and abstract 3D animations, and is currently, are you currently based in London, Amma? No. Bristol, I always get this wrong. So yeah, we've got some regional representation here. We've got Birmingham and Bristol, so that's great. And then we also have Yarli Allison as well, who's our sort of Hong Kong Videotage artist, but who is actually in London at the moment, and is a little bit jet lagged from being recently in Canada as well. So Yarli's work explores themes of digital humanity with CGI imagery, digital sculpting, performances, and moving images. But I'll let we'll find out more about what they're up to and their sort of interests as we go on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. So just please give me a moment, and then we're going to head into some questions that we've got for these two. So I'm just going to mute myself for a second. Just bear with me. Right, thanks for bearing with me there. I'm just trying to tackle with my mouse as I share two screens. So can everyone see the presentation? Can I get a thumbs up from my co-conspirators here on the screen? Brilliant. So these, we're just going to use these as sort of background references, so you've got some visuals to look at for some of the fantastic work that's been done throughout the micro-residency. So I'm going to start off with our first question. So this is to both artists. So can you talk us please through how your ideas progress from the prompt virtual bodies through to the works in progress that we can see behind us today? And what were the important moments for you throughout that process? Who wants to go first?
I guess I can chip in. So in this 5 days, I think I read maybe 30 to 40 academic journals, and also watching quite a lot of videos and thinking about gender gap in health and pain and even in orgasm, and ultimately boiling down to data. And I was focusing on biodata and how it's harvested by authorities, home office, academia, or biobanks, and how our biodata are gathered and sorted, and how it travels that contributed to equity and inequality. And these data bias kind of wider the gender gap or could be closing it. And I was looking at government's women's health strategy to start with in an attempt to close the gender gap in health, and then finding more and more these evidence of research on our system that it's built on patriarchy assumptions, such as even taking abortion pill and birth control pill in Japan will still need partners' consent, or video games heroes, there's only 3% of female protagonists in 2016, or let's say women spend 23% of their lifetime in ill health. And I can dig down to even Stone Age time, how gender roles are expected to, fulfill it in Stone Age time. So this 5 days, I was thinking, how can we, in an utopia world, could release women from reproductive roles and perhaps on an extreme level with thinking about fictional technology, like the option of artificial womb that now helps with premature baby survival, and it sparked a lot of bioethics questions as well. Then researching the uterus, I have found that embryonic stem cells can, from women or human carriers of uterus, can be stimulated and become any sorts of stem cells, any kind of cells material in the world. In hypothetical theory, it could provide to become, even building blocks. Or talking to my medical friends, we're kidding that it could become our mattress as well, and it could become the core of our shelves, and like indestructible bones, and then even stem cells can make sperms nowadays, and we do not need to rely on men's sperms. Think about what can it change in the role, in the gender role, and also men, if men doesn't need to rely on women to reproduce. And these kind of really extreme questions, and ending with a thinking of what this kind of world could be, change to release the expectation of gender roles, and also regenerative substance, the use of it, the change of material supply change, waste and climate, and ultimately power. And so this 5 days has been really crazy, going all over the place.
That's brilliant, thank you. Do you think there's a lot about that in there about sort of materiality and the sort of substances and things that you were talking about? Do you think that is that something that you would love to sort of explore more in terms of getting your hands on some of the biological bits and pieces that you just mentioned, and do if you're allowed to, you know, there's lots of, like you're saying, about the ethics. Is that something that you would have the aspiration to do?
Yeah, I was researching how to build a lab, but maybe turn my closet into it. But even even just let's not think about stem like meats, growing meats, but maybe even using plants as an experimentation material. I can do it with 2 shelves in my home, and just thinking how to, you know, even extract cucumbers themselves to grow in a different form. And it feeds to my, I think, quite sculptural practice, from the digital to the physical, and then building this world in the digital world. Let's say I can build this build a clinical lab in the digital world, and then how that 2 language talks to each other, how does that fiction and reality comes up. And yeah, like I think we can have this material labs kind of playing together.
Fantastic. And Amma, can I bring you in here just to answer the sort of the same question about how you came from the prompt about virtual bodies to the sort of works that we're seeing today?
Yeah, I guess for me, starting with virtual bodies as sort of this broad theme, it kind of felt like it fed into my practice anyways, kind of just being focused in kind of virtual spaces and using virtual spaces as just like ways to just kind of explore ideas in ways that you can't in physical realities. And kind of my research at the time and kind of current research now is looking at kind of the idea of self, but what that looks like in wider context as well as just for yourself. And so I kind of became really interested in the book Dear Senthuran, not sure how you pronounce it, by Aweke Emezi. And that sort of guided the first sort of initial day on the residency. And I guess within that, I'm sort of looking at diaspora communities and how kind of you're balancing going between different kind of cultures. But also, I think for me, it's also like not necessarily kind of as large as cultures, but also just kind of going between like friendship groups or like kind of interactions with the man at, you know, at the post office and then the woman at the supermarket, and kind of how, you know, you negotiate those spaces. And I think for me, I kind of was becoming really interested in how you can manipulate a virtual body to kind of do anything, and it can go in so many ways, and how, like, you know, ideas of self and ideas of myself go in so many different kind of branches that it's kind of unfathomable. And therefore I thought, you know, in making it virtual, you can just manipulate these bodies into being fluid or into being spongy. Or so I got really interested in kind of that materiality within the virtual space of like kind of virtual bodies. So yeah, I guess kind of important moments for me over these like intense 5 days were that the first couple of hours just brainstorming and referring to the book. I just sort of did drawings and like thinking about words and thinking about the ideas. And I got really obsessed with portals and shape-shifting and that sort of concept. And I guess kind of more materialistic, you know, I was just sort of like learning how to make portals on Maya, which is the software I create on. And that has sort of been like a critical point, is making portals, because it makes you jump through time. And I guess I kind of became obsessed with kind of the idea of bending through worlds and time, but bending kind of to others and kind of society and other pressures, and then also bending for yourself and what those 3 things look like. And how they journey around each other as well, and they don't have to be linear. But then, yeah, alongside this kind of just more practical thing of like getting, like, it's fun to make portals, and it's fun to try and see what, you know, you make a rigid body in the software and it, you know, it can do this, but then it can do anything, and gravity can go up, left, right, down, sideways, not exist. And I think I just, yeah, became really interested in that. And I guess another really interesting point was the glitches and the errors that were coming up while I was making stuff over the week. Those were quite important. Like when I was making portals, because my computer can only handle so much, sometimes it like kind of messes up. And those were really interesting moments where I was like, oh, what's happening? And then I was like, actually, that's quite cool, because the portals are sort of breaking even within the machine. So there was sort of this like interesting thing of like what's happening virtually and in the software, and then also what it was sort of meaning to me as a portal and kind of moving between these spaces. Yeah.
So did you feel that the sort of the forms and the sort of characters, I guess, or the forms that you were creating, did you feel a personal sort of connection to them in terms of, were they representing you, or did you see them as a separate sort of form and being?
I guess I tend to work autobiographically, but I guess these things were sort of, they're just doing them, you know, they're just sort of going amongst things. I think a lot of what I make is related to me and my thoughts and my ideas and kind of how I'm processing stuff, especially because they come from drawings. But I think the interesting thing for me is once they go from the drawings into the virtual spaces, they kind of become something else because the software has its own thing on them. So yeah, I guess it's a bit of both.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. Angel.
Yes, actually I have a question. Those of your projects in virtual bodies, although they have different focuses, actually there's something similar in the course about studying the minority which are marginalized by the major society. For example, for Yarli, is female more or less neglected by the medical systems, and for Alma, the disabled communities in the UK. What does it mean to you, and how do you approach this topic incorporating your own experiences, research materials, and gaming? Who would like to go first?
I can go.
Alma, thanks.
Yeah, so I'm British Ghanaian, and I have lived in Ghana till I was about 15, and then in the UK since then. And I think for me, it just involves a lot of adapting, being part of a kind of diaspora community and kind of part of multiple cultures. And I think having kind of my personal experiences within my work is important, because it gives it weight. I think I use research to kind of situate it like in a wider context, and to almost like, I guess almost like selfishly reassure myself that, you know, other people are also thinking about these concepts, and what do other people think and what do other people experience, which I think has influence on it. But I think being able to kind of weave my own experience into what I'm looking at means that I can create more kind of nuanced scenarios, which just to me make it more interesting. They kind of have more complexity towards them instead of just being fact. You can put fiction in, they can have real grey areas. And I guess for me, gaming is just like a fun way to do it. It's like, it makes it to me a more kind of like 5D experience. It's like you can sort of do anything with that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Gaming has its own physics, so it's fun that you can bend the law. Sorry, Angel.
Yes, thanks. Yarli, would you like to go on?
Yeah, I can relate to Emma's like moving, especially when it comes to cross borders, and it extends to my answer, which when I become more aware of authorities gathering biodata, and I'm aware of these biases, how my data is collected or traveled while we cross between country borders, especially when I was moving between the EU and the UK, and also from Hong Kong to Canada. And applying for visas, we always need to give out a lot of data, and then they can verify us. But nowadays we're unsure how, how it affects us, let's say insurance approval or police profiling. It's like how these data are stored and categorized, traveled and used, as I said before. And in some cities that I lived, we have very advanced surveillance technology, and in a way it provides a security, but in a way we have to kind of think between the control and care. And we cannot escape from being watched, but we also want to feel controlled over what assumption that these data holders have on us. And it's hard to not think about who holds the power and where are they coming from. Maybe like maybe being a woman or being queer or being, BIPOC would be, like profiled in some way. And so my last work, Datafication, thinks about privacy and time and machine surveillance, and what if even our most intimate, sexy times are being watched and analyzed by authorities. And very smartly, the authorities use this gamification to get us addictively hooked in order to provide more data, which we voluntarily just gives out to gain access for convenience. And then it branched out to this research nowadays in the 5 days residency. I was thinking about, the gap of health and who holds these power ultimately. And start to think about all these hypothetical questions before any 3D elements are created. So in the slide that Louise is sharing, I have a lot of hand drawings, I have a lot of mind maps, and I choose one keywords that branches out into relevant sub keywords, like a tree that could like a keyword, like a tree of keywords that could build on these kind of questions and realize my work. And then I will try to implement objective personal experience and emotional effects to weight down the work, to give a little bit of weight. But I think going back to Louise's question to Emma, is like whether you would have a personal relationship with the work. And I think a good way is to always have this objective experience or a collective voice that we can maybe somehow have other people also relating to the work as well. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question in terms of research and integration.
Well, I'm just going to take a different point from that.
Yeah, jump in.
It's about the sort of the use, I guess, of gaming as a platform, or gaming platforms, and that collective voice, because there's something really interesting about gaming in terms of that it can be really solitary, but it's also often, with international communities and people are playing together. But it's different when you're creating on your own, sort of in a residency. But do you think that those sort of platforms make it easier for you to be able to sort of create that collective voice, I guess?
I would hope so. I would hope that it would create empathy, because you're playing, I don't know what game you play, but I always play role play games. So you're playing this character that people have written. It's almost like reading a book, but you are unfolding that book, that journey by playing that sort of character in role play games. And and in other games it's about balancing as well. So I think collective voice is yeah, it could be quite released, and you can almost put someone in someone's shoes if not too forcefully. And I don't know if Emma, you have, what game do you play in if that happens?
I guess for me, when I make games, I'm very aware of the control I have as the person making, but also therefore the control I'm giving away when people play a game. And I think that's the interesting dynamic, is what I'm allowing, but also what people just will discover while they play the game, whether that's even like the errors I've made while I've made the game, or kind of things that are more precise. I think that's, to me, the interesting bit, is you can have this, people play the same game and yet you just can take so many different routes to get sort of to different places. And I think, to me, yeah, that is the thing that I consider the most when I'm making it, is what do I want people to do, and how am I actually manipulating people through, but then also the freedom I can give people within that, of like, okay, actually, no, you go anywhere in this space, but then in the next space I'm like, I only want you to see this one thing. And that's, to me, the interesting dynamic you can create with gaming as an art form.
It's the rules again, isn't it, as well? I suppose it's sort of bending the rules and what rules are created, which can be that can happen in a virtual game or any sort of analog game as well. Brilliant, thank you. Well, I want to move on. I mean, sort of still talking about this, the diaspora. And I think that that's within Emma's proposal originally for the micro residency, that was really evident, but it's definitely something that really comes through in Yarli's work as well. But I wanted to sort of bring that into the idea of sci-fi, because I think that your work that you're both making of very much sort of science fiction, this sort of things about utopia and dystopia, and Emma, we were talking even about entopia, this idea in the middle. But do you think that your personal experiences being part of a diaspora have drawn you closer to this way of working in science fiction?
I guess reiterating that idea of being part of a diaspora community it involves a lot of this adapting, but then also kind of, I guess in this work I have been like almost like soul searching of where I can be authentic and what authenticity even looks like, and whether it is even achievable, which is a big kind of existential crisis kind of thing. But then like you were saying, for me, especially in my practice, I always like to have this idea of entopia. I think with digital mediums, you kind of end up leaning towards sci-fi just because of the medium itself. The medium of technology always feels slightly sci-fi. So it's kind of like you kind of fall into it. And then it's like, okay, what do I do now that I'm in this space? And there's a book called Between Dystopia and Utopia, which is something I always go back to. And it's like, or the way I kind of interpret it in my work is you have these kind of two extremes. You have your utopias and your dystopias, and both of them are kind of unfathomable and unimaginable, and they won't ever really exist because they can't, just in their nature. And in the book, they talk about, this in between, this entopia, and it has sort of this basis of realism, and yet still has these influences of utopias and dystopias. And it's like, how do you get to that kind of in between, that balance, that middle ground? I think being part of kind of multiple cultures and like kind of bending through different spaces, you're kind of trying to find that balance. So I think they sort of sync on that, to me, on that search for a middle ground, and yet they are still influenced by very different kind of experiences.
And also thinking about sci-fi, when we think about sci-fi, I think about the question of how we survive, like survival question of how we live, and a lot of books that I read, it's almost about fitting in or alienation, or thinking about problem solvings and colonizations, and I relate to it myself. Back to the diasporic experience is to draw on my, I think, experience of moving between homes or cross city moving and countries. Almost every 2 years that I would have to pack my bag and just go. And in a new culture, there's question about how to survive and surviving the language and their gaze and desire and even grief of leaving a space that you once feel familiar with. And then that branches out to my sculpture training, which is an amazing ways of hoarding amazing burdens and of material and sculptural tools and objects. I think a lot of sculpture people can relate to that. And I think about, will in a digital world, my burdens would be free from objects, and will my diasporic life be easier if I don't have all these, art objects around me? And I started to scan my 3D sculptures, my 3D installations, 3D scanning them, translating into the digital world, and thinking about the usage of these objects, and then the relationships between them, and thinking about boundaries as well. We think about boundaries in real life. Can we break the laws of physics in game, and how does this digitalized process of our bodies and the things, the stuff around us can shape humanity, and what rules can we have? And I've been thinking a lot about the Chinese ancient saying, the poem, 本來無一物，何處惹塵埃. It translates to when there is essentially nothing or no objects around us, then there is nowhere to collect dust. And I thought maybe the burden is about having physical stuff around us, but then COVID reminded us how important is touch to human, when we can make things with our hands, and then it goes back around to the questioning how we live again, how are we as like diasporic individual or having these experiences, backgrounds, what kind of choices do we have in society? I hope I'm not dragging it too far away.
No, I think it's fascinating, and I think there's a real sort of threads of rebellion coming out from both of you and the works, and there's something really sort of interesting in that, in the sort of, from the sort of female identifying perspective, a queer perspective, a diasporic, non-white perspective as well, which is really fascinating, and it's sort of bubbling under the work that I maybe hadn't sort of seen before, but which makes it all the more richer. So thank you for sharing. Angel, have you got?
Yes, thank you so much for your sharing. Actually, I like to give a little feedback from what you have said. I think it's interesting now when we talking a lot about virtual materialization. Now we're having a talk on Zoom, and we are having the whole residency online through different tools. But diaspora experience is much about physical world, about how we move from one place to another, and how we are affected by the entire environment change. And when you explore this topic in the virtual world, actually it makes a lot of sense, where as you have just said about gaming, it is a world we have a lot of control of what it would be, or how we experience it, how other people experience it. So I think actually it to me, it's just amazing that it comes to a full circle about how our own experience, or what topics both of you are really concerned about, is actually connecting with the medium, like which is gaming we're using for this residency. Speaking of which, I'd like to know actually what is your gain from the residency experience, and also we have seen the amazing lot of documentation and draft and rendering that you have created and given it during the residency. How will you take your work from here? Like, what are the future prospects of your projects? Thanks.
I'll go first. Yeah, so I mean, the residency period just gave me time. Like, it was an intense kind of 5 days, but I also used kind of time before and after it, and it will continue. But it was time to just focus and bring lots of different research elements together, and using tools and kind of processes of working that I hadn't used before. And so that was kind of what I really appreciated, was just waking up every day and working kind of more than 9 to 5 on something I really wanted to have time to work on, and just dedicating time to it. But yeah, moving sort of forward from kind of what I have created, I mean, I haven't really gone into the sound element, and sound often plays like a key part in my work. I like to use sound recordings of conversations and other things. And so that's sort of the next sort of step for me, is kind of collating these and editing these and kind of putting them into the game and seeing how those affect the situation, and how that can kind of warp ideas of what's happening in the game, instead of it just being atmospheric. I think having conversations as well kind of puts a spin on it, or even it just being like a BBC kind of documentary just playing in the background or whatever. So I'm interested in seeing kind of how sound can kind of push kind of ideas further. But I think, yeah, because I've kind of developed this also, like the ways I'm using portals, and I've just become obsessed with portals, is going to make it really easy for me to jump into other kind of wider kind of research elements that I'm also kind of interested in. And it means that I don't have to necessarily make a like linear, obvious, like kind of jump. I can just be like, this is where my stream of consciousness took me, and that's where it's going to go. And I kind of see that as a look at, well, I've become kind of more interested in looking at, I guess, ideas of colonialism and empire, and how that influences my idea of self, as well as just I guess diaspora. But I guess with diaspora, to me, comes this idea of colonialism, and how that will impact the game. But yeah, that's all kind of just extra research that will come.
I hope I can borrow one of your portals so I can jump around cities to eat food. Like if I miss Taiwan or Hong Kong food, I can just open a portal and jump
in. Too.
Like you, I also gain precious time, and I finally could sit down and research what I wanted to do, and I was able finally to play with ideas, and research 3D modeling and gaming platforms, and because I think we are just full of distractions in life and in city life, and having this, it's really precious. And in the end, now I have downloaded a few games like Gary's Mod or Frostpunk, and seeing how balance and like strategy balancing system, and the glitchy cyberpunk, to see how they have imagined a dystopia world with biotech. And although I felt like traversing in the city felt really like the 90s in Hong Kong and Tokyo, it's a strange mix. And I have also researched how to set up a stem cell lab, as I said before. So I don't know if it's in the slide, but I'm designing the lab and modeling it digitally, and I was hand drawing what kind of equipments that I need, like a biosafety cabinet. And so talking to medics and friends with scientific background has led us thinking of, you know, what could be possible to allow women or non-binary people or genderqueer people having the say and power. We can re-explore morality, moral and bioethics. And so based on these kind of conversations, I will build a fictional world made by embryonic stem cells, where any stem cells can become plastic or steel, not become, like replace plastic and build towers like steel, or even to be our cup. Can you imagine holding a stem cell cup and then drinking the water? And then there will be certain physics and logic to the material, and we'll see how it goes from there. And I imagine this work will be branch off from datafication series that I made about intimacy and sex and surveillance. And so I really enjoy this open-ended residency where, you know, I can approach software differently, from having an aim to produce things and to just play with these softwares and game experiments with the programs, like when I was a kid, and fooling with HTMLs, like I'm fooling with blenders nowadays, and to make web games and even low-res GIFs or GIFs, which I think the fooling around is really rewarding in this 5 days time.
Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like one day I'm going to see like a call out for stem cells and placentas and teeth from Yarli, so I'll have to save some up.
Maybe not in real life.
Yeah.
Or maybe I experiment with mine first.
Brilliant. Well, so brilliant. So we are going to open it up now to see if there's any questions from our lovely audience. And yes, we do have a question from the Q&A. So it says, how much of the virtual stuff is by the artist and how much is by the computer program, the AI? Is it going to be the trend of making art in the future? So that's an interesting question.
I love this question because it's always at the back of my mind. Like, how much, like my previous work, datafication, that I mentioned. By the way, if any of you wants a link, I can also send it. Just email me. And I was fighting with the decision not to use AI, like even Photoshop AI or Premiere Pro AI, Adobe AI, or even Midjourney nowadays. How convenient is one click of a button that can generate stuff in our computer, and how much control we have? Maybe just clicking that button, that will become, the image will become very intriguing, and then we will just settle in that. And I think of that is almost like the artist's laziness versus like Francis Bacon's accident. When he discovered this accident of throwing paint on the canvas, that kind of stroke is really intriguing. Should I keep it or not? So I think that decision of keeping it or not, it's the artist's decision, whereas that accident almost maybe it's created by AI. And I think that for me is acceptable. But in the future, where AI generated movies and, you know, and visual imageries, it becomes more and more dominant, then I'm not sure like whether, but I would imagine people will argue it's Jeff Koons art made by assistants, his art. So I guess it's just a new tool that we have to kind of have a philosophical debate with. And I'm interested in how you think as well. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, I think I echo that. It's like I see it as just another sort of media, and it is like painting, or it is like sculpture, I think it will become more popular in the future, or it is already becoming more popular in the future, because accessibility is changing. People have more access to the software for free, really good software for free. But I mean, I make stuff in Maya, so I'm modeling, but also I also use free like modeling downloads that other people have made. And I always think that's a really interesting dynamic of like, they've made something on a computer, so I don't know how much they've used a computer to make it, but now I'm downloading their kind of model of a book or model of a lamp, and I'm using it. And what, I don't know who that person is, but it's free on the internet. And then I've mixed it with my modeling stuff, or then I put a different texture on it. So there is a lot of kind of human interaction in kind of the work I make, or you can have a lot of human interaction in kind of digital mediums. But also there is this, to me, I always think, who also made the software that I'm using? Who made the tools that I'm able to use? Who said that, you know, I can kind of highlight all of these vertices and pull them? And who coded that? So I think for me, I come from a fine art background, so none of it comes from, I mean, all of my learning is from YouTube. And so I'm always interested now in like, well, who's made this software, and who's going to make the next software that's going to be kind of the next industry kind of level, or kind of the next accessible one, because right now I think Blender is the most accessible because it's free, but who's made, and that's open source, and so lots of people are making it. So there's, to me, there's interest in who's making the software that we're using, not just that it's just the computer. And I'm not really in, I don't really use a lot of AI, I guess, in my work, but ideas on what is a computer is, you know, that can go on forever.
That's a whole other talk.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So we've got another question in the Q&A, but it's quite similar to that. I guess we may have covered it, but it says, what's the most interesting thing about using games basically to make art? So I suppose that could be, that doesn't necessarily need to be computer sort of generated, but do you have anything else to add that you find interesting about using gaming? And it doesn't, like I say, it doesn't even need to be the platform, but maybe even thinking about processes and the ideas around games and how games are made.
For me, because I started with kind of 3D modeling and then animation, and in my final year of uni, I was just like, I'm gonna make a game, because why not? And it felt like I'd opened Pandora's box, just sort of learning. I use the Unity game engine, so I did sort of their like introduction stuff, and I was just like, whoa, I can now just like make someone come up to an object, and then they can hear the sound, and then they go to another object and they hear a different sound. So it was just like, it felt like my toolbox had gone from this to this, and it was like, just felt like, oh, it's never ending, which to me is just fun. I think it's just fun every time, you know, you're learning something new in the software. I just get so like nerdy and into it. Yeah.
I think my freedom when I was a kid, I was just making all these web-based games, and even playing by myself, like using paint software to make how do you call it now, pixel art. So drawing pixels art and move around these and make stories are really fun, I think. And as I say, I love this word empathy, and I think when you create these kind of work, you can share, then that it's building imagination together and building conversations with either with characters or with the environment and the infrastructure that you built. And then thinking about, you know, the ethics of gamification nowadays in our everyday life, how it creates addiction effects, even just you know, scrolling, the way of scrolling and using our fingers, that kind of eternally scrolling is also quite a rewarding system that is a passive act. And then thinking about, you know, even Tinder or other dating apps, you swipe left or right, and then you encounter this unpredictable reward that you might be able to match with someone, or the next one will be a really beautiful person, and then that kind of also having the limitation, like only 5 matches per day, that kind of thing. It's really thinking about how gamification can integrate in our everyday life now technologies around us, digital technology. And I haven't made games from scratch for a while like Emma, but I enjoy using sandbox games a lot and cheat codes to build narratives, and I wish and to see how it unfolds under my wishes. Like you can summon a bunch of chicken just drowned in the lake, but not really drowning because there's no oxygen coded in the game that you won't die, and it defies gravity. And the game is fun when the physics finally bricks. Like I get inspirations from watching YouTubers to brick systems in unethical ways, like on YouTube, Let's Game It Out by Josh on YouTube. It's an excellent bug tester when he plays game very unethically. But I just want to draw like the gamification in our everyday life, and I think whether it's art or not, it's going to affect us in all sorts of way, and we have to be, I think, aware of that.
Thank you. So we've had a few more questions, and we are coming to an end, but I think we can squeeze in. We'll try and squeeze in as many as we can. So the first one says, talking about software advances, is there value in going back to use or explore older software like Poser, Strata, or old Maya versions? Are the rendering programs games in their own way? What do you reckon?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obsessed with like the idea of PlayStation 1 graphics, but I think for me, what I'm also I think it sounds silly, but to me it's too easy to go back to the older ones, because then I know that you can quite quickly achieve kind of older aesthetics using older ones. I think I'm quite interested in using current software to achieve like that retro aesthetic or those retro looks. But yeah, rendering programs are like, I mean, I end up making games where I include what I've rendered into the game because they're such an interesting kind of component for me. But yeah, I think it will be interesting how we use older and newer versions of software kind of also simultaneously. I think there's a space for them to all be used at the same time. Yeah, to produce really interesting results.
Brilliant.
I really like the old, like polygon looking, or pixelated looking from like, I don't know, like on 2005 versions of 3ds Max, let's say, like in Blender or in Cinema 4D is really, really fancy. You can build high gloss and depth of field really easily, just a click of a button and the AI can calculate for you. But that old aesthetic, I think it's very nostalgic for me. Like it creates this like going back to that specific time and memory kind of ways to me. So even though, as I say, like playing with Cyberpunk, it's flashy looking, have all these technology kind of implanted in the visual elements. It looks new, but then it has this 90s of Hong Kong and like Blade Runner in the 90s. So maybe that goes to Emma's like using this new tech to look nostalgic, which is interesting. So maybe not necessarily using an old program that could always crash, but integrating both together. That's an interesting question for me as well.
And I think this will have to be the last question, sadly. So we've got, how do you gear towards empathy, or what goes into the control of representation so that empathy is encouraged? It's quite a big press question to end on. But yes, if anyone's got any comments on that, it'll be lovely.
I'm not sure myself. I also always jiggle in between like how much empathy would be inside the artwork itself, and whether people want that. But in the creator point of view, I would always try to have affects in the work, and whether they could relate to it. For example, my seafarer works last year in October with Facts Liverpool. I try to have a lot of affects in there and have a lot of personal experience, although they're fictional based on reality, but it's quite the scenario is talking about the Chinese diaspora's seafarers in 100 years in Britain. So it's quite narrow in a way, but then if someone has a similar diasporic background, or have worked as a seafarer in the colonial context, maybe they could fit in. Like, that's the hope of me, to create this empathy within that community, and hopefully that could enlarge to a wider circle as well. So it's the creator's point of kind of hope that people can relate to it.
Yeah, I think I would just echo that. I think in my work as well, it's just like trying to put yourself in it to get nuances that you hope that, they're specific to you, so you feel it more than anyone else. But I think it's just a feeling that I hope, it's a hope that other people will feel something that is kind of remotely in the area, or even if it isn't, as long as they're feeling something. I think it's just like a gut. And I think, to me, that just kind of comes through just atmosphere and being true to yourself when you're making the work. And if it feels right for you as a creator, then and you feel like you're saying or feeling what you want to convey, then I think it will kind of result in the work anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And from a curatorial point of view as well, you can feel that and see that in people's work. You can understand that quite quickly, I think, in artists' work, when they're, not necessarily have the direct thing to say, oh, this is to, create empathy, but you can tell when work is sort of opened up to other people and other people can relate to it. And I definitely saw that in both of your works when you applied for the residency. So thank you so much. We have run out of time, I'm afraid. Lindsay's face has popped up to remind me, but yes, thank you so much for everybody for coming and for asking those amazing questions. Thank you to Yarli and Amma for being so fabulous in the residency and this morning in talking to us about their work. Thank you to Peer-to-Peer. Thank you to Videotage and all the teams at BAM and Videotage who have been involved with the project. So please do have a look at what else is happening as part of the Peer-to-Peer symposium and come along to some more events. But that's it from us for today. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thank you all, Angel, Amma and Yarli, for such a really fascinating discussion. And I'm really sorry we couldn't answer all the questions. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear you reveal the processes behind your work. It was a really quite an intense residency, and sort of hearing about your reading, your research, your thinking, your discussion about very serious topics. However, I was also really delighted to hear you talk about the joy of experimentation and play and fun. That was really great to hear. So I think we will all watch with interest to see how your works evolve, and please do keep us informed. So just to wrap up, to remind you that the recording of this session will be uploaded onto the website later today, and please do share it with your networks. I think it really is fascinating. Can I also encourage everyone, like Louise has said, to browse all the other different projects that have evolved out of the peer-to-peer programme. There really are some very wonderful and innovative approaches to international exchange without travelling, and loads of fantastic artists from both places to discover. And finally, can I remind everyone that the next panel discussion is tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning UK time, 5 o'clock Hong Kong time. Artist Power and Place will be chaired by Paul Herman from Red Eye in collaboration with Chloe Chow from WMA and Rebecca Burns and two of the artists, Anna Sellen and Joseph Leung. And I know they will be discussing if there is a future where artistic careers are not linked to location. and I know they really want to hear from the audience. So it sounds like it's going to be a great session, so please do join it. So thank you all for attending today, and hope to see you throughout the rest of the symposium. Thank you very much.